Hi, I'm Kristen, and today is another Quilt-As-You-Go experiment on the long arm. I've started with a backing, which is half of a single duvet cover, and I'm putting on the batting, but there's no quilt top because I am, air quotes, piecing and quilting as I go on the long arm. So it's not about joining techniques. It is more of a piece and quilt as you go sort of thing. There is a part 1 to this video and I will link to it in the description. That was more of a stitch and flip kind of thing. This one, we're going a bit more modern and we're going to use some raw edges. So this is the duvet cover I started with, and those are the colors that I kind of took as inspiration for the front. So this is a fabric pull, press the fabric, and then the idea was just to sort of layer pieces of fabric on top of each other, not flipping any raw edges. And I'm going to use some matchstick quilting basically to make sure the raw edges don't pop open. So matchstick quilting, if you haven't heard of it, is basically stitching straight lines back and forth really close to each other. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm using the channel locks, so I'm using 2, and I'm basically like it. Okay, guys, I did honestly starch and iron these pieces of fabric before I started, but they still look wrinkled. Anyway, so, but it all came out in the quilting. So anyways, if you're like, why is she working with that unironed fabric again? Anyhow, so I'm basically just layering it. I'm not stitching and flipping. I'm not doing any of that. The raw edges are still going to be there. There will be some fraying, but that's going to be part of the kind of look that we're going for. So I'm using the 1/4 inch square foot, Handy Quilter square foot on a Moxie long arm machine. And I'm kind of using the hopping, so the square foot hops, and I'm using the hopping to kind of help me get over the raw edges. I'm kind of trying to smooth them taut with my hands. And this first pass is me kind of learning how to do it. I got faster as I went, because I just don't want the raw edge to sort of flip over and be stitched down, you know, flipped kind of thing. I want it to stay straight. So that was the main thing I had to pay attention with for this method, was sort of holding the fabric taut as I went, basically. So why am I doing this? I mean, one, you know, I like to, if you've seen the channel before, you probably know I like to experiment with things. But 2, I do like the idea of these sort of modern quilts with lots of negative space and things like that. So partially I was trying for that kind of look, but also I just wanted to see, you know, what it would look like. We're all sort of afraid of the raw edges, but I do a lot of raw edge applique, so why couldn't I do it with sort of big bits of fabric, you know, I suppose was what I was thinking. What would that turn out like? So yeah, just another experiment. Now, again, just like the last one, I've got basically the throat space of the Moxie, which is the long arm that I'm using. So it's a 15-inch long arm, but by the time you're kind of, you know, advancing your quilt and things, you end up with, like, I think about like 11 or 12 inches or something like that, where you're actually quilting. So you're advancing it every 11 or 12 inches, essentially, of quilting. So, and that's about how much I can see at a time as well. So this quilt, again, was not planned in advance. I didn't, you know, block out where things were going to go or know exactly how it was going to look. It was just a case of what piece of fabric from my pile that matches the backing do I want to put on next. So every time I advanced it, you saw me there taking the channel locks off. I was kind of trimming bits of fabric as I went and then just laying them down, overlapping. And the main thing I was trying to do was keep it flat while I stitched over it so that I didn't kind of like curl the raw edges over. You'll see a close-up later on. So it did happen a few times, but it definitely looks much better when I kind of smoothed it out and let the hopping foot sort of jump over the raw edge. And this wouldn't work if I wasn't doing super close quilting either, because then you would have the gaps where the raw edges, right? Anyway, so I just kept going with that. That blue piece of fabric had like a laundry mark on it, like with numbers, and a stain from, like, I don't even know where I got that piece of fabric. I buy fabric in random places, right? And I thought it would be kind of cool and trendy, but you know, to have like an oil stain on my quilt. Anyway, but I'll show you it at the end. It didn't totally work in the end to have that weird stained piece of fabric. Anyway, here's the close-up. So I just am stitching across again with the channel locks. I used 2. Somebody asked me in the last video, actually. So I do put one channel lock on either wheel, so that I'm locked going horizontally here, so it can't move vertically. And I don't cut the threads when I get to the other end. You can, even though the channel locks are on, you can still kind of pull it like a stitch or two, and then you can just advance to the next row. So that's kind of how I was doing it. And if they pop off, you just put them back on. So this is me kind of massaging the fabric, I guess, to keep it straight as I'm passing. I've seen people do it on the handy quilter videos, and I always didn't understand what they were doing until I tried to do something like this, and then I find myself kind of doing that with the fabric just to keep it going where I wanted. So I'm just kind of pulling it somewhat taut as I reach the place where I'm going from one, like sort of jumping from one piece of fabric to the other. And then there were other bits here. So if I didn't overlap it enough, you can kind of see it's a little bit puckered underneath the blue there, that's the light blue that's unquilted there. But I'm just covering it up with another piece, and you don't see it in the end. So that worked out okay. So this is relatively monotonous, this kind of technique. You're kind of going back and forth with the matchstick quilting. There's no piecing, so there's no complication there. But I did find it took a fair amount of concentration to keep the fabric flat and to make sure I was hopping over the raw edges every time I went to another piece of fabric. So I couldn't actually, like mentally almost, sit and do this quilt for more than an hour at a time. I had to take breaks, which is bizarre because all I'm doing is putting fabric down and quilting it. But anyway, that's how it went. So I really do like this technique. I liked how bits of it came out, but you're going to see at the end when the quilt comes off, it was a kind of a strange shape because I had started with the single duvet cover as the backing. So it was kind of long and narrow. So I did some kind of different things with the quilted piece when I was done. It didn't finish up as like a bed quilt. So you can stick around to the end to see that. I'm going to put on some music, let you watch some of the process. Again, in terms of like where the fabric is placed, it was just a kind of by instinct. I was trying not to think about it too much, because it's an experiment, because it's just scraps. It doesn't really matter. So sorry, I can't give more guidance than that. It's just a case of, I feel like I want some yellow there, or I feel like I want a bit more of that wine color. And it was all mostly squares and rectangles, and mostly larger pieces. I didn't so much use lots of little bits, but I'm thinking this might be a technique where I could do that in future because there's not all the stitching and flipping. So I've got a few more Quilt-As-You-Go experimental ideas on the long arm, but I think they're going to wait for a little bit because I've got a few other projects I want to do first. Anyway, I'll stop talking and I'll let you watch this. If you don't want to watch it and you just want to skip ahead and see what it looks like at the end, there are timestamps in the description. So this is it finished. I trimmed it, but I didn't bind it because at this point I had decided I didn't want it to be a bed quilt, too long and narrow. We don't really need single bed quilts. So what I did was I found this frame because I keep everything and I cut the quilt in half lengthwise. So I decided I liked it, but I liked the bottom on its own and I liked the top on its own for something else. So the bottom was my favorite bit. And so I cut that off and basically just stretched it to the back of this frame. So there's no glass in this frame. And stapled it on and trimmed off the edges. I obviously could have cut it to size ahead of time, but we know what I'm like. I just kind of go and do stuff and then hack things off later. So anyway, stretched it and stapled it to the frame and then put it up as a piece of artwork in my entry hallway, and I actually really, really like it. And I've already had quite a few people kind of come into the house and see it and kind of go, what's that? Is that fabric kind of thing? So there it is there. The lighting's not great for the photo, but I really, really like how it turned out. With the rest of the quilt, I cut it in half again. I made 2 tote bags, one with the backing on the outside, just because it was so pretty. And I was able to hide that weird stained bit of fabric on the inside. And then another one with the quilted part on the outside and a bit of a basket bottom. I have one little bit left, and I'm going to probably use that in some sort of, I don't know, Quilt-As-You-Go orphan block thing in the future. I'm going to save it, and it won't be wasted for sure. So thanks so much for watching another one of my experiments. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.